Kwame woke up early that morning, stretching his arms and feeling the fresh air through the window. It was a bright day. The birds were singing on the trees outside his small house, and the smell of roasted coffee filled the kitchen. He smiled to himself, thinking it would be just another normal day. He picked up his cup, drank a slow sip, and whistled as he walked toward his car parked under the big mango tree. His mind was already planning the day. He thought about visiting his friend Kojo, buying some groceries from the market, and maybe stopping by his grandmother's house before evening. Everything seemed calm and ordinary, and he had no reason to expect anything strange. With a relaxed step, he unlocked the car and pulled the door handle. The moment the door opened, Kwame froze. His eyes grew wide. For a moment he thought he was dreaming. His car was not empty. His seats were not waiting for him. Instead, the whole inside of his car was alive and moving. Raccoons. Not one, not two, but many raccoons filled every corner. One sat proudly in the driver's seat, its small paws touching the steering wheel as if ready to drive away. Another was on the dashboard, looking down at him with shiny black eyes. Two more were digging into an old paper bag he had left on the back seat. The whole car seemed to belong to them now. Kwame's coffee cup almost slipped from his hand. He blinked, then rubbed his eyes, but the raccoons were still there. One even hissed softly, warning him not to come closer. The strangest thing was that they did not look afraid. Instead, they looked at him as though he was the stranger. His first thought was to shout, but his voice stuck in his throat. He could not believe what he was seeing. A raccoon on the passenger seat tilted its head, chewing on a piece of paper, while another tapped the window with tiny paws. The sight was both funny and terrifying. Kwame slowly stepped back, unsure of what to do. As he stood there in shock, the raccoons continued their mischief. One pulled down the sun visor, another jumped on the seat and sniffed at the seatbelt, and the smallest climbed up to the steering wheel and pressed the horn. A loud honk filled the air, making Kwame jump and spill some of his coffee. The sound of the horn caught the attention of the neighbors. Abina, who lived across the street, came out of her house, holding a basket of laundry. She looked at Kwame, then at the car, and gasped. Soon, Kojo from next door walked over, wiping his hands with a cloth, curious about the noise. Within minutes, a small crowd gathered, pointing and laughing at the sight of the car full of raccoons. Kwame's face turned red. He was embarrassed but also completely helpless. The raccoons seemed to be having the time of their lives while the whole neighborhood laughed. Someone shouted, "Kwame, it looks like you have new drivers." Another laughed louder, saying, "Better give them your license." Kwame scratched his head, looking for a solution. He tried clapping his hands loudly, hoping the noise would scare them away. Instead, the raccoons looked at him, blinked slowly, and went back to chewing, climbing, and exploring. He tried stomping his feet, but they ignored him. He even waved his arms and shouted, but the only response he got was a raccoon sticking its head out of the window and making a strange growling sound. He could not go closer. He had heard stories of raccoons scratching or biting when they felt threatened. Yet he could not just let them stay in his car forever. His mind raced with ideas, but none seemed safe. Kojo, standing in the crowd, finally spoke. "Kwame, maybe they are looking for food. Do you have something to lure them out?" Kwame thought quickly. In his garage he had a box of ripe mangoes. They smelled sweet and he knew raccoons loved fruits. Without wasting time, he ran to the garage, grabbed the box and carried it back, feeling the eyes of the whole street on him. Carefully he placed one mango on the ground near the car. The raccoons twitched their noses. The one on the dashboard sniffed, then climbed down toward the open door. Another followed, jumping lightly to the ground. Kwame placed another mango a little farther away, and slowly the raccoons began to leave the car, following the sweet smell. One by one they jumped down, picked up the fruit and waddled off toward the bushes nearby. Finally, the last raccoon, the small one who had been sitting on the steering wheel, climbed down reluctantly. It grabbed a mango in its little paws and ran after the others. Kwame let out a long sigh of relief. His car was finally empty again. He peered inside and shook his head. The seats had scratch marks, the dashboard had paw prints, and the whole car smelled strange. But at least the raccoons were gone. The neighbors clapped and laughed, some still recording on their phones. Abina smiled and said, "Kwame, today you gave us a story we will never forget." Kojo patted his shoulder and teased, "Next time remember to lock your car at night." Kwame could not help but laugh too. It had been one of the strangest mornings of his life, and although his car was a mess, he knew this story would be told again and again in the village. He held his empty coffee cup, shook his head and muttered, "All I wanted was a quiet morning." The raccoons were gone, the crowd slowly returned to their houses, and the street became calm again. But Kwame knew one thing for sure. He would never forget the morning when his car was taken over by raccoons. The end. Kwame stood there, still holding his coffee cup so tightly that it almost slipped from his hand. His car, the one he had worked so hard to keep clean and well-maintained, now looked like a playground for raccoons. The little creatures acted as if they had signed a lease and moved in. One of them sat on the driver's seat with its tiny paws gripping the steering wheel, staring at Kwame like it was about to drive away. Another had its head buried deep in a crumpled snack bag he had forgotten to throw out last week, its tail sticking up and wagging with excitement. A third one had discovered the seatbelt and was gnawing on it with determination, as though chewing through safety itself. Kwame blinked several times, convinced he must be dreaming. He even pinched his arm lightly, but no, this was very real. The raccoons were comfortable, too comfortable, and none of them showed any signs of leaving. Instead, they all stopped for a moment to look at him, their bright eyes glinting with mischief. It was as if they were saying, "What are you doing in our house?" He took a slow step backward, coffee still in his hand. He had seen raccoons before, usually near trash bins or in alleys, but never like this. Never inside his car. This was chaos, and yet it was strangely organized chaos. Each raccoon seemed to have chosen a job. One to eat, one to chew, one to drive, and one to guard. The one on the steering wheel gave a small hiss, making Kwame nearly spill his drink. "What in the world?" Kwame whispered to himself. His voice shook slightly. His neighbor, Abina, happened to be walking by. She stopped when she saw him frozen in place by the car. "Kwame, why are you just standing there?" she asked. But then she followed his gaze and gasped so loudly that the raccoons perked their ears. "Oh my goodness. Are those raccoons? In your car?" Kwame nodded slowly, still too shocked to say much. Abina laughed nervously, covering her mouth. "Yeah, this is something else. Your car has become a zoo." The raccoon in the driver's seat adjusted its position like it truly was preparing to drive. It pawed at the steering wheel, twisting it back and forth. Kwame's eyes widened. "Abina, it thinks it owns the car." Another raccoon found Kwame's sunglasses in the cup holder and put its paws all over them, smudging the lenses before tossing them onto the floor. The smallest raccoon, clearly the bravest, climbed onto the dashboard and tapped at the glass with its little claws, leaving streaks across the windshield. Every move they made felt like a personal insult to Kwame's careful nature. "This is madness," Kwame muttered, finally setting his coffee on the ground so he wouldn't drop it. He waved his arms slowly, trying not to startle them. "Chill. This is not your place." The raccoons blinked at him but didn't move. Instead, one of them grabbed a leftover receipt and began tearing it into tiny pieces. Another dug its claws into the seat cushion, scratching long lines into the leather. The sound made Kwame flinch. He had spent months saving for those seats, and now they were being shredded like paper. Abina covered her mouth again, torn between horror and amusement. "Kwame, I think they like it here more than you do. What will you do now?" Kwame didn't have an answer. His heart raced as he realized the chaos would only grow worse if he didn't act. One of the raccoons leaned forward and pressed its nose against the horn. The loud sound echoed through the street, startling everyone within earshot. Abina jumped and Kwame nearly fell backward. The raccoons, however, seemed unbothered. In fact, they looked even more entertained. By now, a small crowd had gathered. Neighbors peeked out of their windows and a few children ran closer, pointing and laughing. They shouted things like, "Uncle Kwame's car is a raccoon taxi," and "Look, the animals are having a meeting inside." Their laughter only added to Kwame's embarrassment. He was a respected man in the community, known for being careful, neat, and serious. And now everyone was watching his car get taken over by raccoons. Kwame wiped sweat from his forehead. He considered calling animal control, but the thought of waiting while these creatures destroyed his car made him panic. He considered grabbing a broom to chase them out, but he worried they might attack if they felt threatened. For a moment he even wondered if he should just give up and let them keep the car. But then one of the raccoons did something that pushed him over the edge. The smallest one, still perched proudly on the dashboard, pressed its tiny paw onto the hazard lights button. The car lights began blinking on and off like some sort of wild party. The children outside clapped, cheering louder. "Dance, raccoons, dance," they shouted. Kwame's jaw dropped. His car was not just invaded, it had been transformed into an entertainment center for the whole neighborhood. He buried his face in his hands and groaned. "Why me? Out of all the cars, why mine?" Abina placed a gentle hand on his shoulder, though she was trying hard not to laugh. "Kwame, maybe they chose you because your car looks comfortable. Or maybe," she added with a teasing smile, "they know you are too kind to hurt them." He gave her a sharp look, but deep down he knew she was right. He didn't have the heart to be cruel to animals, even mischievous ones like these. But as he peeked at the disaster inside his car, the torn papers, scratched seats, blinking lights, and fearless raccoons, he realized he couldn't let them stay much longer. Something had to be done, and fast. The chaos was only getting worse, and the raccoons showed no signs of leaving. Kwame took a deep breath, readying himself for what might be the strangest battle of his life. Man versus raccoon inside a car that used to be his pride and joy. Kwame felt his face heat up as the situation grew more ridiculous by the minute. What had started as a normal morning had now become a full performance for the entire neighborhood. When he shouted for help, he had imagined someone bringing a smart idea, maybe even a way to safely chase the raccoons away. But instead, people poured out of their homes, not with tools or advice, but with wide smiles and glowing phone screens. Abina stood closest to him, still giggling into her scarf. Next came Kojo, his old friend from across the street, who immediately pulled out his phone and started recording. "Yeah, Kwame, this is too funny," Kojo said, shaking his head. "Only you would have raccoons holding a meeting inside your car." Kwame groaned, his hands gripping his hair. "This is not funny, Kojo. They are destroying everything." But Kojo only laughed harder. Soon, children were gathered again, clapping their hands and chanting, "Raccoon taxi," as if they had created a new game. A group of women from the corner shop joined in, covering their mouths as they recorded the scene. The street, usually quiet in the mornings, now buzzed with laughter and excitement. The raccoons, meanwhile, seemed to enjoy the attention. The smallest one, still the boldest, pressed its nose to the window like it was posing for the cameras. Another climbed up onto the dashboard and scratched at the glass, as though waving to the crowd. The one that had been chewing the seatbelt gave up and scurried onto the roof of the car, standing tall as if it were the king of the neighborhood. The people watching gasped and clapped. Look, it's on top now," someone shouted. Kwame, desperate, tried clapping his hands loudly to scare them away. This is my car, not your house." His voice cracked with frustration. The raccoons paused, tilting their heads, then simply hissed softly and returned to their play. He waved his arms, stomped his feet, even whistled loudly, but nothing worked. Instead, the raccoons grew more confident, climbing onto the side mirrors and bouncing slightly like it was a game. Kojo laughed so hard he nearly dropped his phone. "Kwame, you should thank them. Free entertainment. Everyone will remember this day." "I don't want to be remembered for this," Kwame shouted back. His coffee cup, now cold, still sat on the ground beside him, forgotten in all the chaos. He thought about picking it up and splashing a little at the raccoons to scare them, but he hesitated. He didn't want to be cruel, and besides, with all the neighbors watching, someone might call him heartless. In an attempt to distract them, Kwame remembered the granola bar in his pocket. He pulled it out quickly, tore the wrapper, and waved it in the air. "Here, come and take this. Outside, not inside." His voice carried across the street, and for a moment the raccoons turned their heads. Hope flickered in Kwame's eyes. Slowly, he placed the granola bar on the ground a few steps away from the car. But instead of climbing down, the raccoon on the roof hissed softly, almost like a laugh, and jumped higher onto the car's antenna. The smallest one darted forward, pawing at the window as if saying, "Nice try, but we are not leaving." Another raccoon poked its head out of the open car door, sniffing the air, but it didn't come down either. The granola bar sat untouched on the ground, and the neighbors burst into louder laughter. "Kwame is negotiating with raccoons now," someone teased. "Soon he will invite them for dinner." The crowd doubled, with more people coming out from nearby houses. Phones pointed from every angle, capturing the scene. Kwame felt like he was on a stage, his embarrassment only growing. He covered his face for a moment, wishing the ground would open and swallow him. He had always been known as a quiet, serious man who avoided attention, but now he was the star of the strangest show in town. Kojo, still recording, came closer. "Kwame, maybe you should just accept that this is their car now. You can walk to work today." His grin widened as the raccoons tapped the horn again, the loud sound making the children squeal with joy. "Kojo, this is not a joke." Kwame snapped, though his voice was drowned out by laughter. His dignity was slipping away with every passing second. The raccoons began exploring the roof as if it was their playground. One stretched out lazily, lying flat on its belly with its chin resting on the glass. Another climbed onto the edge, curling its tail high, while the smallest raccoon hopped up and down as though celebrating its victory. From below, it looked like they were performing tricks for the neighborhood. The crowd cheered again, phones flashing, voices rising in playful chants. Kwame tried one last time, banging on the side of the car. "Enough. This is my car, not your circus." His voice broke with desperation, but the raccoons barely reacted. They only shifted slightly and continued their playful mischief. Abina stepped forward, her laughter gentler than the others. Kwame, maybe you should calm down. They will not leave if you keep making noise. Raccoons like a challenge. If you show them you are angry, they will enjoy it even more. Kwame stopped, breathing heavily, sweat forming on his forehead. Her words struck him. Maybe she was right. These raccoons were not scared of noise or anger. If anything, they seemed entertained by his frustration. But the crowd did not want calm, they wanted more chaos. Children shouted for the raccoons to dance again while Kojo called out, "Try singing, Kwame. Maybe they will leave if you sing." Kwame glared at him, but deep down he knew he had lost control. His morning had turned into a neighborhood show, one that was being recorded on dozens of phones. By evening he feared the whole town would know about the raccoons in his car. The raccoons, however, showed no sign of leaving. They ruled the car as though it had always belonged to them, while Kwame stood powerless, surrounded by laughter, recording phones, and the sting of humiliation. And as one raccoon finally climbed to the very top of the roof, balancing like a proud acrobat, the crowd cheered again. For them, it was the funniest morning they had ever seen. For Kwame, it was the longest and most embarrassing morning of his life. Kwame stood in the middle of the street, his face red with embarrassment as the raccoons continued to play king of the car. He had tried shouting, clapping, waving his arms, even bribing them with a granola bar, but nothing worked. The neighbors were still laughing, their phones pointed at him, while the raccoons acted like the car was their castle. He realized that using force would not help. If he tried to chase them, they might scratch him or worse, refuse to leave out of sheer stubbornness. He took a deep breath and tried to calm himself. He remembered Abina's words, noise and anger only made the raccoons bolder. He needed a plan that was clever, not loud. His mind raced until suddenly he remembered something in his garage. A wooden box filled with leftover mangoes from last week's market. The sweet smell had been strong enough to fill the whole garage. If he could tempt the raccoons with something they liked more than his car, maybe they would finally leave. Kwame excused himself from the crowd. "Wait here," he muttered, though no one was paying attention to his words. The neighbors were too busy laughing and filming the raccoons striking poses on his car. Kojo even shouted after him, "Kwame is giving up. Maybe he is packing his bag so the raccoons can keep the car." The crowd roared with laughter. Kwame ignored him and hurried to the garage. Inside he quickly grabbed the mangoes and carried them back outside. He opened the box carefully, the golden fruits shining under the sunlight. Immediately the sweet smell filled the air. Even some of the children stopped chanting and sniffed. "Mangoes," one of them cried, giggling. Kwame set the box on the ground and took one mango out. He placed it gently on the driveway just a few feet away from the car. The raccoons turned their heads almost instantly. Their little noses twitched as they caught the scent. Hope flickered in Kwame's chest. Maybe this would work. He picked up another mango and placed it farther along, creating a small trail. He repeated the process slowly, carefully setting the fruits down one by one, each a step farther from the car. The neighbors began to murmur with interest, their phones still recording but now less mocking and more curious. "Yeah, look at Kwame," Abina whispered with a smile. "He is thinking like a raccoon now." The first raccoon to move was the boldest one, the small one who had claimed the driver's seat earlier. It sniffed the air, tilted its head, and then hopped down from the seat to the car door. Everyone held their breath. The raccoon leaped onto the driveway, landing gracefully near the first mango. It sniffed again, then grabbed the fruit with its tiny paws and began nibbling. The crowd clapped softly, some even cheering as if watching a play. The second raccoon followed quickly, climbing down from the roof. It joined the first, pawing at another mango. Soon, a third raccoon jumped out from the open window and waddled over to the trail of fruit. One by one they were leaving the car. The plan was working. Kwame felt a surge of triumph but forced himself to stay calm. He picked up another mango and placed it farther down the path, leading toward the trees at the edge of the neighborhood. The raccoons scampered after the fruits, their little paws tapping against the concrete as they followed the sweet trail. The children squealed with delight, running alongside but keeping their distance. The boldest raccoon carried its mango like a prize and darted toward the trees. The others followed, climbing down the driveway, across the grass and into the shade. The trail of mangoes disappeared into the woods, and with it the raccoons disappeared too. One by one, the mischievous little animals vanished into the green leaves, carrying their treats with them. The crowd erupted in applause, cheering as if Kwame had just performed magic. "Bravo, Kwame!" someone shouted. Kojo, still holding his phone, shook his head and laughed. You outsmarted them at last, my friend. The raccoons have been defeated by mangoes. Kwame sighed deeply, wiping sweat from his forehead. He felt both relief and exhaustion. His car was finally free, but his pride had taken a beating. Everyone in the neighborhood had witnessed his struggle, his shouting, his failed attempts, and finally his unusual victory. Still, he couldn't deny the satisfaction of watching the raccoons scamper away into the woods. Abina walked over, her smile kind. You see, Kwame? Wisdom works better than anger. Even raccoons cannot resist the sweetness of a mango. Kwame managed a tired smile. Yes, Abina. But now I must clean my car before I can even think of driving it. The neighbors laughed again, but this time it felt lighter, less mocking. Some even came forward to pat him on the back. Children skipped around chanting, Mango Man, while Kojo teased, Kwame, next time, park your car inside the tree so they don't have to travel far. Kwame shook his head, but even he had to laugh a little. The morning had been humiliating, yes, but it had also shown him something important. Sometimes clever thinking could win against chaos, even when chaos had sharp claws and furry tails. He looked toward the trees one last time, where the raccoons had vanished with their golden prizes. Deep down he knew they might return one day. But for now the car was his again, and the neighborhood had a story they would never forget. Kwame stood by his car, finally able to breathe after the wildest morning of his life. The raccoons were gone, lured away by the trail of mangoes, and the street was quieter now. Neighbors still lingered, whispering, chuckling, and replaying the videos they had taken on their phones. Some even promised to upload them later, and Kwame knew he would never live this down. But at that moment relief washed over him. His car was his again. He leaned against the car door, staring inside. The sight made him groan. The seats were torn and scratched, the dashboard had muddy paw prints all over, and one of the seat belts looked like it had been chewed into ribbons. His coffee cup was still in his hand, completely cold. He hadn't taken a single sip, and yet the morning had drained him of all his energy. He muttered to himself, this is what happens when you leave a car unlocked. Abina, standing nearby with a smile, spoke softly, at least they didn't take the engine. The neighbors burst into laughter. Even Kwame had to laugh, though he shook his head at the thought of raccoons driving away in his car. Slowly he straightened up, dusted off his clothes, and bowed dramatically to the crowd, as though he had just finished performing on a grand stage. The laughter grew louder, mixed with clapping and playful cheers. Bravo, Kwame, shouted Kojo. You survived the raccoon invasion. Kwame laughed too, though his cheeks turned red with embarrassment. He knew this story would be told over and over again in the neighborhood. Children would whisper about the morning when raccoons took over Mr. Kwame's car. He imagined parents using it as a funny lesson, close the door or the raccoons will move in, just like they did with Kwame. Still, he could not deny that part of him felt proud. He had solved the problem without hurting the animals. His plan with the mangoes had worked, and now his neighbors saw him not just as the man with the expensive car, but as someone clever enough to outsmart a family of raccoons. As the crowd began to scatter, Abina came closer. Kwame, she said gently, sometimes life teaches us lessons in the funniest ways. Today the raccoons reminded you that pride cannot save you, but patience and wisdom can. Kwame nodded slowly. Her words stayed with him. It wasn't just about raccoons or a damaged car. It was about learning to face problems with calm, with creativity, and even with a little humor. He picked up the last mango from the empty box and took a bite. The sweetness filled his mouth and he couldn't help but laugh. Who would have thought, he said aloud, that mangoes would save my morning? Later that evening, Kwame stood by his car again, carefully scrubbing away the dirt left by his unexpected visitors. The sky had turned orange with the setting sun, and the street was quiet now. He thought back to the sight of raccoons sitting proudly on his seats, acting as if they owned the car. The memory made him laugh again, though he also shivered at the idea of it happening twice. That night, before going to bed, Kwame walked out to his driveway one more time. He bent down, checked the car doors, and pulled on each handle firmly to make sure they were locked. Then he peered through the windows, half expecting to see glowing raccoon eyes staring back at him. But the car was empty, calm, and silent. Only his reflection looked back at him. He sighed in relief, whispering to himself, never again. From that day forward, locking his car became a habit as natural as drinking water. No matter how tired he was at night, no matter how late he came home, he always checked the doors twice. Some neighbors teased him, saying he looked like a guard watching over treasure, but Kwame didn't mind. He had learned his lesson well. And so, life in the neighborhood returned to normal, though the story of Kwame and the raccoons never died. Children laughed about it, Elders shook their heads with amusement, and neighbors still teased him whenever they saw a raccoon scurrying in the distance. But Kwame only smiled. For him, it was more than a funny story. It was a reminder of humility, patience, and the unexpected ways life teaches us to laugh at ourselves. He never forgot the lesson that day gave him. You never know when chaos might sneak into your life. It could be trouble at work, a sudden challenge, or, in his case, a car full of raccoons. But no matter how strange or surprising it was, the best way to face it was with calm and a little cleverness. And of course, he never forgot to double-check his car doors at night, because you never know when a family of raccoons might decide to move in. The end.